Welcome to episode 34 of the Creative Strings podcast with our special guest, Joan Griffing.
Hello, and welcome to the Creative Strings podcast. I'm Christian Howes, violinist, educator, and music business entrepreneur. I hope these interviews will inspire you to be creative in your life, in your art, in your business, in every way. So without further ado, let's get to it.
When I was growing up, people used to always say that you should go into music only if you feel you don't have a choice. If you're going into a career to make money, there's other things you can do. People say, well, if it's something you feel you have to do, then you should do it. Because otherwise, it's going to be a struggle, or it may be a struggle. So for those of us that made that choice to go into music, we were inspired by this feeling that it's what I've got to do. We had that passion around it at some point. It could have been when you were in high school, or it could have been in conservatory or college, when you felt that compelling love for the music, the passion that kept you awake at night, that kept you in the practice room. And that's why we went into music. The thing is that when people get out of college and they get into the real life of being a musician, the drudgery sets in. In fact, I remember even before getting out of college, I had some professional gigs with the Columbus Symphony, and I went to work and I was shocked to see the attitudes of some of the musicians in the orchestra. And I mean no disrespect to any of them. It's part of what it is to be a professional musician doing it day in and day out. But I would notice the musicians coming in and just their attitude. It couldn't have been more different than the attitude that I felt from my peers at Ohio State University. There was this sense that everybody lived for the music in college, but in the orchestra, I got this sense that people were kind of showing up, but they weren't always happy to be there. So here's the thing. How do we keep that passion alive? Or better yet, how do we continue to understand or even re-articulate why we play music and what makes it so important for us to continue to make music? And as we change, as we go through different phases of our life or our career, that reason could change as well. And I think it's really important for us to ask those questions, because ultimately we want to feel fulfilled by the music that we make. And we also want that music in our life to be integrated with our own personal development and with whatever contribution we're trying to make to our communities. Is getting to the heart of these types of questions and telling stories about how different people, different musicians, how they grapple with this, that really is what motivates me to want to bring this podcast out. And today's guest, I think, is an amazing example of someone who has done this. Joan Griffing is a classical violinist, and she is taught at the private level, collegiate level for many years. She's been a freelance orchestral chamber player and soloist for many years. She's an amazing classical violinist and a well-rounded classical musician. And part of what I think is so interesting about her story is that she chose at this point in her career, at this point in her life, to take a sabbatical and to take a journey. Her journey was to uncover deeper meanings for what it is to be a musician. And that to me is super inspiring. You'll hear in this interview how she went to New Zealand and how she learned there about ways in which music is being used for peace and reconciliation, prison reforms, and to create healing between individuals in conflict and between cultures in conflict. It's a really fascinating story. And it would be hard for us to invest the time to bring these stories to you properly without support. And we have support from two really important sponsors. They are Electric Violin Shop and Yamaha. I just want to tell you briefly about them both before we get into this interview. So as you probably know, Yamaha is a company that I've worked with for over 20 years. They support music education in so many tremendous ways. Obviously, they also make electric string instruments and acoustic bowed string instruments. I encourage you to check them out. And one of the best places where you can check out their instruments is Electric Violin Shop. I love Electric Violin Shop because their whole team knows very intimately about everything that an electric string player would need. They offer amazing phone service. You can just call them with any questions you have. I get questions every week from people asking me about this, that, the other, whether it's pickups, amplifiers, electric violins, all this other kind of stuff. I just say, call Electric Violin Shop because they'll answer all your questions. So give them a call. Just go to their website, electricviolinshop.com/creative strings. And the phone number's right there. And make sure you ask them about their Yamaha line of electric violins. Also, by the way, Electric Violin Shop has a great podcast. It's called Rockstar Violinist. If you like the Creative Strings podcast, you should check out Rockstar Violinist. All right, here we go. Let's go to this interview with my amazing guest, Joan Griffing.
Here today with Dr. Joan Griffing, a friend of mine. We go way back. Thank you so much, Joan, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's an honor and privilege to be speaking with you.
I just want to come straight out and talk about one of the main reasons that I reached out to you, and there's a lot to talk about, but first I want to talk about your project. You took a sabbatical and you did a research project related to the role of music in peace and conflict. Could you just tell us about that? That to me is just fascinating.
Well, I think anybody that's a musician is interested in how music can help change the world and what kind of difference can we make rather than just getting up and giving a concert here or there and expect people to come to our concerts too. So I've always been very interested in taking my students out to perform and to interact with different people in the community and just having music be a bridge to other people and bringing people together, even if they're not like-minded in, certain ways politically or ethnically or religiously, but then music can really be a common bond. And so that's always been an interest of mine. So when I had sabbatical, which is one of the privileges of teaching at a university, you get to take some time off from your regular duties. And so I was looking around to find a country where I thought that music played a very interesting role. So I kind of landed on New Zealand because to me, they have really probably gone the furthest in having the two cultures there, which may be somewhat in conflict. They really have worked very well and come up with positive ways of working together. It's a small country, so they really can't live that far apart. There's a lot of close proximity in New Zealand, and so the two cultures have had a lot in common and a lot of crossed boundaries quite a bit. And also the indigenous society, music is a very integral part of their culture. And so when you come on to their marae, which is the place they often live together and a community of Maori, you are welcomed with music. And a lot of this ceremony revolves around music. Music is seen as the breath, so everybody can sing. It's not like only a few people are chosen who have talent, who are allowed to do music. It's everybody. It's a part of life. It's a part of breath. So everybody can sing. Everybody participates in music. And then the other thing I really liked about their cultures there is that when you finish a speech or you give some kind of presentation, a song is presented at the end as a conclusion for that speech. So just music is very integral to the Maori society. And the way that I saw it integrated with the settler society, I mean, there were quite a few societies that came in and settled in New Zealand. The Chinese have a big population, but also there was a very big influx of Europeans that came in, started out with the whaling economy that brought a lot of Europeans. And so a lot of those people have remained and have settled in New Zealand and now, basically run the island. But the people there are very interested in reconciling. They have used music also as a way to bring these two societies together. And so I was really interested to find out the specific ways that people have reached out and used music as a way to bring the two cultures together.
This is so awesome, Joan, and just because we're friends and I know you, I'm not surprised, but I'm still surprised, and I think it's such an awesome subject that you've gotten into this. You ever thought about the difference between the notion of having participatory music, like what you're describing, where music is sort of a part of everything, versus our tradition of learning classical music and how we're sort of, isolated sometimes, and it's sort of institutionalized in a way. I don't know if I'm describing it right, but there's practice rooms and you've got to have air conditioning, and people would never think about playing outside or something like that. Did that ever occur to you?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely came up because in Western society, it's only those who have talent or only those who have the right education or started at a certain age, or, only those people are seen as viable performers. I mean, it's probably more what you do, where it's very much a conversation with people. It's not just getting up there and being the star of the show. Music is a way to interact with others, and it's very much that way in the Maori culture too. Everybody's singing. It's just like everybody's speaking and everybody's breathing, and it's something everybody does. Whereas in our culture, it's you have to pass certain tests. You have to make sure you're on track. You have to make sure you pass your jury and your recital exams, and in other cultures, it's really seen as something that everybody takes part in. And I think that's just a much healthier way of expressing ourselves. Everybody can express themselves through music.
That's great. That's great. And I mean, I should mention for our listeners too, I mean, that you're a highly, like, an elite classical violin player and a professor. And so I think for people who come from our background of that classical training, it makes us do a double take when we kind of confront that. So that's great. So restorative justice was a theme that came up in this, right? And I mean, can you talk about how this concept of restorative justice and music came together around your research?
Yes, Howard Zare was on the faculty at my university until he retired, and he was the one that basically came up with the idea of restorative justice, and that's where you get people that have been harmed, and then those people that have done the harm, they bring them together only if the two parties are willing. They're not going to force people to meet, but it's a chance for for the person that was harmed to say, this is how your crime affected me. I want to have that opportunity to speak to you about that. And then it's also an opportunity for the person who did that crime to look into the face of that person that they hurt and to possibly say they're sorry and to make amends. And so when people can really look at each other in the eyes and come to grips with the harm that has happened, and then to reconcile that in some way. Now, again, that's not going to be for every crime and for every individual, but it's been very effective, and they use it quite a bit in New Zealand. They have used restorative justice in the court system. They have used it in the prison system. One of the gentlemen I have spoke to in Wellington was actually a jazz drummer in his earlier days, but then he became a police officer. And so what he does when he meets with young men who've been in prison or are in prison, he goes to them first as a jazz musician. And he says, hey, you guys, let's do some music together. And so he builds that bond through music with them. And so they get to know him first as just another musician. And then he eventually comes around and says, hey, I'm also a police officer, and I want to work with you on finding ways for you to move on with your life and this kind of thing. So he uses music as a way to make a bond with somebody, so that somebody doesn't automatically see him as the enemy when they, realize that he's a police officer. And other people that I've spoken to, this judge I spoke to in Auckland is very interested in having music be part of their reconciliation. So, maybe if somebody committed a crime, could they go out and use music to pay back the person that they harmed? Can they perform in some capacity? So again, using music as a tool for them to reconcile in the restorative justice program.
So would that be like singing a song of remorse, or, for example?
Doesn't necessarily need to respond to that particular crime that happened. It could. I mean, people do they do use music to express themselves. There was a really interesting project that took place in the prisons. They had musicians that went into the prisons and worked with inmates and these were usually people that were going to be coming out of jail, to use music to tell their story. For some, this was the first time that they felt comfortable saying what happened to them, or how did they get off the tracks, or what was their experience growing up. And so they use music as a tool to express themselves. And for some of these people, it's the first time they were able to express themselves. And then some of them have gone beyond once they gotten out of prison and become musicians and had a career that way. So that's a really powerful set of stories. The gentleman that designed that program has a whole series on public television, and has been asked to institute similar programs around the world, bringing musicians into prisons to help people, use music as a tool to help them tell their stories.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm going to have to get that the name from you later, because I want to reach out to that person.
If you are a music educator, or if you are a fan of music education, look up this free magazine made by Yamaha called Support Ed. You can simply just Google Yamaha Support Ed, E-D, and you can download copies of this magazine, or you can subscribe and you'll get 4 copies a year. It's a wonderfully produced resource for music educators, and it's totally free.
I didn't necessarily intend to bring this up, but I mean, I know that that I spent time in prison, and that's part of probably what draws me to this story from you, is because it was really some experiences in prison, musical experiences, that really changed my perspective about music in many ways, and some of these themes really resonate to me. I guess if I had to describe it, what I felt was that the presence of music in prison seemed to infuse humanity in an environment that otherwise felt alienated of humanity. There's a sense of a void, an absence of trust, an absence of freedom, an absence of intimacy. And that void, I believe, is what feels like violence. And the presence of music, I thought, was a palpable sense of humanity being infused back in, so that I can remember how much emotion it made me feel. I could like be in touch with my emotions when there was music around, whereas when there wasn't music around in prison, you're very, you can be depressed, or just consumed with fear, or just, numbed, or whatever, or angry. Whereas the music will really allow you to express in deeper ways your truer feelings. And I think that I also noticed, and these are themes that you touch upon in some of the texts of your research, but I also noticed that music allowed people to come together. It allowed people to feel more at ease, maybe for the reasons I just mentioned, because they felt more human, but also there was a sense of bonding with other convicts or inmates through doing music together, or hearing, walking around the yard, you would hear music and you could just see that everybody's attitude was a little lighter.
Well, yeah, I think what you're talking about would be exactly what you see in these videos. I think it was called Music from the Inside Out. And I met with the filmmaker about his project. He was an actor also, and then he ended up taking music into the prisons. But you can see it on, when you watch these videos, it takes place over a period of 6 months. And they show them going in the first time. And, the musicians are kind of wary, walking into prison. And then you can see, the inmates being a little standoffish and not sure what these people are, what they want to do. And then by the end, they're making amazing music, and you can just see life coming back into their faces and into their voices. And so it's very palpable. And your story is especially inspiring to me, Chris, because you have used what could have been a very negative experience in your life to turn it into a positive. Everybody has negative experiences in their life. They might not all be as people don't speak about them as much as you have, but everybody has something that's negative in their life, and everybody can use that to turn it into something positive. That's a big story of music in New Zealand, and this prison setting is just one way, but we all deal with these things in our lives, and what we all need to do is learn how to not have them be a noose around our neck, but a way for them to learn how to grow into individuals.
Now, your trio is called Musica Harmonia, and the CD you guys did is the chamber music of Gwyneth Walker, among other works that you've done. Can you say more about why you chose to do African American spirituals?
We came across one piece that we just really enjoyed playing. It was called Midnight Child, Charles Washington. And we really enjoyed performing that piece together. And so we thought, well, I wonder what else is out there along these lines. And we couldn't find anything. And so we had this relationship with Gwyneth Walker, and so we asked her to write a piece for us based on African American. So that's how we came into that piece. The spirituals are just so rich in, harmony and melody and rhythm, and they're super fun to play, and Gwyneth does amazing arrangements of them. So it's just been a really wonderful way for us to connect, peace building and music.
And some of that's tied to the lyrics. So even if you're performing this music instrumentally, people could still refer to the words, and there's something related to this peacemaking mission.
Yes. When we do this spirituals, almost everybody recognizes the melodies, and so then it draws them in immediately too.
In addition to managing conflicts between countries or between entire cultures within one society, does this equally apply just if you have a conflict with one other person? I mean, so like if you're a pacifist, that means you're not going to like punch somebody if they call you name or if they do something to you. Is that correct, or no? I'm just curious.
Well, that would certainly be using our skills to the best way possible. I would say that we're all human, and so we all do have conflicts with others. I mean, I think that, obviously if somebody's standing there with a gun and I'm going to shoot you, you can't say, hey, I'm going to play my violin for you, or let's sing a song, But I think, in some of the, more dire straits around the world, music could be used more as a reconciliation tool. Once the killing is stopped, once the wars are over, then musicians could go in and use music as a way to bring people together and to help children overcome trauma and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you can't be naive about it and think that, oh, we're just never going to have any wars and then we're never going to have any murdering. I mean, that would be idealistic, right? So I don't want to think of music as some kind of Pollyanna, but I think it could be a tool for people around the world to use in appropriate situations when it could be seen as a productive tool. I don't have any ideas that music is going to stop people from killing each other, because that's probably never going to happen.
Well, you mentioned the idea of helping children overcome trauma with music, and I'd love to see if you agree with this observation. As trained classical musicians, I wonder if you agree that oftentimes we sort of lose sight of the bigger picture of how music does have the ability to make this impact on people, and how we can serve people and impact them, because we're so focused on like our Paganini, whatever, the fine nuances of our bow arm, for example, or our left hand. Do you agree with that observation? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think musicians tend to be type A personalities, and they're always going for perfection. And if you're on the audition circuit, you have to just focus on everything being perfect, and you have to get used to, not being chosen. You have to have a thick skin when it comes to trying to make a living as a performing musician. So it can be very tough. But I think that ultimately it's not about perfection. I love hearing amazing soloists, and I love hearing you play, Chris, that have reached a very high level of artistry. But that doesn't mean that everybody has to do that to be able to use their musical gifts, whatever they are, to make a difference in people's lives. And, one of my students, when I took them to a halfway house to interact with some men that had just been out of jail and that were, living in a house together, and we went in there, and students played for them, and she said, it's so cool just to think that I can make a difference in someone's life. And she said, it really made all the difference. All those years of practice were really worth it for me to have that experience. And sometimes it's just, a matter of showing up. People said, why? I never thought that anybody would want to come here and play for us, and so it's a way of showing respect for other people, and, giving something of yourself to others. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a superstar to be able to contribute to society in that way. But I always want to tell my students, keep practicing. We can always do something better. We can't just check that off the list. Okay, I've done the Sibelius Concerto. Fix that. Well, no, that's not exactly right. Something can be better about it. And so the ongoing challenge is worth getting up every day for. But until I get to that peak moment, I can still use music as a way to help my fellow human beings on Earth.
At the beginning of this episode, you heard me talk a little bit about the motivation for the Creative Strings podcast, to bring stories that are going to help you think about why you play music. Stories that can help you in your own personal journey to find, personal development and fulfillment, and to make the biggest contribution you can, however it is that you're a musician. Well, that's part of the reason that I founded Creative Strings as a 501c3 nonprofit. 5 years ago, we became nonprofit. I wanted to separate what I was doing, as a musician, with a vision to bring our community together and to try to amplify my own contribution somehow. And I'm still trying to figure that out. But Creative Strings has a clear mission, and it's to support music education. And we have three main ways that we do that. It's through providing online curriculum, such as this podcast and the ongoing videos that I put up at Christian House Tube on YouTube. Also, we do it via outreach. We do visits to school programs all over the country and all over the world every year. If you're a teacher in an orchestra or a teacher in a private studio, reach out to me to explore the possibility of setting up a visit with your students. And finally, we do it through our annual conferences. The Creative Strings Workshop, as our conference is known, has been around for 17 years. And this year, we're doing it in 6 cities around the world. So definitely, if you're a teacher, a pro, an amateur, a student, we would love for you to explore our workshops, find out where they are, and consider coming to one. And if you have a question about it, You can always reach out to me, a question about any of these things, at chris@christianhouse.com, or just go to christianhouse.com and click education. You'll find it all right there.
I think as classical musicians, a lot of us feel, like you said, because we're so aware that there's so much room for growth as musicians, we're kind of holding back from sharing with the world. I mean, some people might even say that, like, we're ripping people off, and maybe we do that out of this sense of modesty, like, oh, I haven't prepared it. It's not good enough, so it's not worth being shared with you today or whatever. Maybe we think that's modest, but I think we're really ripping people off because, like you said, like people, they feel grateful when you show up and perform music for them. And it's a way of really giving to people. And so when you're being modest as a classical musician by shutting yourself in your practice room and only performing when you've got air conditioning and a press release and a conductor and a page turner and an accompanist, how many people are you ripping off? I'm not saying this is the answer, but to me, this is one perspective that we could reflect upon. Because not only is music infinite in terms of what we can learn and how we can continue to get better, there's another side of it that I think is equally true, which your anecdote speaks to, which is that almost any musician can really, really powerfully impact other people, no matter what level they're at.
Right.
And I think the culture that you were visiting in New Zealand, it's speaking to that every human being has a voice that's beautiful and can really impact people. So I think it's not enough for us to pay lip service to it. I feel like as classical musicians, it's up to us to literally take it to the streets.
Yeah.
How can we take our music and perform it more unashamedly? How can we be more giving with that music? And for a lot of us, we have to really get a little bit creative. I mean, Christmas, you walk and knock on your neighbors' doors and play a song for them. Do you go out on the street corner and just play one day? Do you play in your backyard? We don't want to aggravate our neighbors, but at the same time, you don't need all the trappings. You think
Right.
you need trappings, but you don't even need an instrument. You can beat out beats on a picnic table, and you can rap, and you can sing, and you can accompany yourself, and that's what cats do in the joint. And that was why 15 years ago when I started my camp, I thought we're going to play music on everywhere, in the street corners, on churches, and wherever place, because I think it shakes us up as classical musicians because we're so used to just being shut in the conservatory, literally
Right.
shut in our practice rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the fear of musicians is being judged, and part of that is they judge themselves too harshly. But I think you hear people say, "Oh, but why should they come hear me? I have to be as good as that CD that person has at home." And we all know that CDs can be touched up and
Right.
fixed a little bit in the studio. And so I think people have a fear that they have to be as good as the CD, or else people aren't going to want to come to hear them. So, but then again, that's all about the concert hall and the concert experience. But I agree with you that if we can just get music happening more places, and what we did at my university a couple of years ago was something I stole from the Virginia Symphony, because I'm a member of the Virginia Symphony. They did something called Art Attacks, and so I did it at my university. It was actually a Christmas season, and we just went around and showed up, and we played duets, or we sang. We just knocked on the door, and came into an office, or went into the cafeteria, or just went to the president's suite, and we just started singing Christmas carols or playing duets for them, and it just brought such joy. Everybody's so frantic and, so busy at exam season and that kind of time. It just helped everybody smile and relax and enjoy the season, and just take a moment out of their life to say, "Hey, that was great. I really appreciate you guys coming down and thinking of us." And I must say, when I did that, I went out with my students, and I went to places on campus I had never been to before, and I met people that I'd seen their names on email, but I'd never met them before. So there, all of a sudden, there was a lot of human connection happening there, and those are always good things. We do so much technology, and we technology is great. Here we're doing Skype today, but that human connection, I think we want to make sure that we keep working at, and music is just a fundamental way of connecting with others.
Well, I really want to ask you, though, about, your perspective as a woman in music, and whether or not there's a connection, if you feel there's a connection with your interest in peacemaking. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I think everybody would agree that, what we mostly know about in the classical music world is male composers, right? So Mozart, Bach, and Beethoven, of course. Then we have recently learned about Fanny Mendelssohn, or about other women that did compose. Clara Schumann. I mean, there are many now. Lily Boulanger, many famous women that have come to the fore. And so I think that what I have been interested in doing is just finding music and supporting current women composers to let their voices be heard, to celebrate the accomplishments of women musicians. So just to be a part of that, that's been an exciting piece that I have done with my colleagues in Musica Harmonia as well. It's just...
That's great. But do you think women have maybe a strong role in that, in sort of changing the consciousness of the world and helping people resolve conflicts better, I guess, or in more peaceful ways?
Women often do have different personality traits. I mean, you will hear some women say, if women ran the world, there may be fewer wars, and they might find ways to come together. But, women have conflicts with each other too. And, but I would certainly love to see more women represented in government, represented in CEOs, represented in politics, more equal to what the population represents. So I just think it makes sense to have much more diversity, across the board, as far as, religious representation, and all across the board, not just gender too. So it's not just one group of people. So I think that genders or religions, all cultures. But as far as music, I think that actually is a field where women have been given multiple opportunities and have shown their talents, and their achievements have come to the fore. So I would say that as far as composers go, it's been an area that's just been of interest to me. Whether it's necessarily peacemaking, it's just allowing some other voices to be heard. And when all voices are heard, then it is going to be hopefully a more equal and peaceful society.
I'm curious, where were you in your career when the curtain was established for classical auditions? Or had it already been established when you started auditioning for orchestras?
I think I pretty much always did auditions behind a curtain. So, my DMA dissertation was on orchestra auditions. And so I had a questionnaire that I sent out, and I got about 65 responses, I think. My dissertation is actually now on a website that called, I think, it's some kind of violin audition website. But it was really interesting to read. And what I did was I interviewed concertmasters, because I figured concertmasters are the people really responsible for who's hiring, who's getting the job. And so it was really interesting to hear their perspectives on the use of the curtain and the idea of fairness and in auditions. I think in orchestra auditions, what I have seen is there definitely is a care for and a desire for fairness.
In the jazz world right now, it's a real issue, maybe in the similar way that it was, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago for women in classical music. But I think that I don't know how much you've heard about it or if you're aware of it, but I think I'm definitely very aware of there's a sort of a disproportionality of men in jazz, and there's some women that are really speaking up a lot more now about how there's a lack of representation on faculty in jazz programs and lack of opportunity for women to be in jazz. Is there anything that you would want to share with perhaps younger women who are, trying to make it in jazz, for example, or another aspect of the music business? Or
I would just say, what my father always told me is just pursue what you love and things will work out. Life is too short to try and force yourself to do a job or a career that you don't love. It has to be something where you want to get up every day and work at and get better at and strive for and have that be your means to make the world a better place. So I think that's true for anybody, male, female. And I think that there are people out there that you can turn to for mentors. And, there are women that have been successful in every aspect of music. And so I would hope that they would help other women find a place and encourage those people to use their talents. The main thing that I think in music is that you have to decide for yourself if you're going to do it. If you get turned down in an audition, and if that's going to turn you away from music, that's not for you. You have to be willing to get back up over and over again. And you have to be willing to go where the job is. And you have to be willing to live apart from your spouse. You have to really be willing to make a lot of sacrifices in music. And that might not be for everybody. And that doesn't mean that you're a lesser person for it. It just means you have different priorities, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And people should only pursue music if that is their passion, if they have to be doing it. It's a part of who they are, and that's what brings them life every day, right? So if they can see themselves doing something else, there's no shame in doing music on the side. But I think if you have that passion, every person should be encouraged to develop themselves as much as they can and to use their gifts and their passions to better society.
I love that. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to put up links to some of Dr. Joan Griffing's, her research project about the role of music in peace and conflict. Hopefully we'll put some other links up to things you referred to here, like your dissertation, the documentary you mentioned about music programming for convict populations in New Zealand. And we're going to put that all at christianhouse.com for sure. If you go to christianhouse.com, that's HOWES. Just click on the blog, and this podcast will pop up. Or if you haven't already subscribed, just subscribe to Creative Strings Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, etc., etc. Look for Joan's trio CD. The trio is called Musica Harmonia, and the CD is Chamber Music of Gwyneth Walker.
It's also called When the Spirit Sings. That's the name of one of the pieces on it. So it's When the Spirit Sings, Chamber Music of Gwyneth Walker.
Wonderful. I just want to tell you that I admire you a lot, and I have so much respect for the work that you've done, and having known you for a while, I have nothing but respect and great fondness and admiration for you on all levels, and just really appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Chris. Thank you so much.
Huge thanks to our sponsors Yamaha and Electric Violin Shop for supporting this and other episodes of the Creative Strings Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Creative Strings Podcast. You can always reach out to me at chris@christianhouse.com. We would really appreciate it if you leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, and share it. We really want to spread the podcast wherever we can. And as I said, definitely take a look at the Creative Strings workshops. We're in 6 cities in 2019, and they happen every year. We would love for you to come. And the sooner you look into it, the sooner you'll be able to take advantage of our early bird discounts. Get info about the workshops. Just go to christianhouse.com and click education, or reach out to me on email. I'm always interested in your feedback. Love hearing stories from people online. People send me emails about it. I always get back to your emails. Also running into people on the road. It's awesome when I run into someone at a school where I'm giving a clinic, or at a conference, or at a concert, and someone will come up and say, I've been listening to the podcast and I really enjoy it. That keeps me motivated to keep these coming to you. So please do share your feedback. Reach out if I can help with anything, anytime. Thank you so much.